Okay, so the question that I got was, all my work is digital, but it looks so wildly different on each monitor I see the image on. I'm worried about how it will print if I work with a publisher. Help. That's a great question. It's
That's
a great
question.
It is.
So that's why they do proofs, and like that's why you get like printed proofs sent to you to make sure what you see on that paper is what you want to go to print.
There's a million projects where they don't send the printed proof. The book covers, for example, I've never received a digital or an actual printed proof on a book cover.
Yeah, well, in that case, if you're really concerned about it, ask for it. But you want to know my honest, unpopular opinion?
I want to know. Wait, first, give us the dishonest one.
The dishonest one. The dishonest one is it matters. You should really stay on top of that. You should ask for proofs, even if they don't send it. My honest opinion is nobody cares.
Okay, here's my opinion now, based on what Jake does not know what he is talking about.
Let me finish saying. Stop. Here's the thing is, you do your illustration, unless you're doing like these weird colors that look weird between RGB and CMYK, it's going to look fine. And the average person who sees it is not going to be like, oh, I don't know, those blacks are a little too black, or oh, those blues should have been sharper. Nobody cares.
Jake does not know what he's talking about.
I love this because we have a throwdown. Go for it, Lee. And I'll break the tie.
Here's the way. Ultimately, you can't. The one little caveat with what Jake's saying is you can't control the ultimate end printing. You can't. I mean, some of it's gonna be printed in the United States, some maybe in China. It could be printed anywhere, and it's gonna change. Even the same file printed in two different printers is gonna look different. But you can take steps to try to limit that amount of change, and you can take steps on your end to try to help the whole process. And they're easy steps to take. And so it's crazy to just send it out and not just say, oh, I'm not going to worry about that, because you're asking for it if you do that.
Jake, you're crazy.
I'll tell you a few things. If you want to test me on this, if you're working in Photoshop, go into Photoshop and select your color profile. You'll see it under the edit thing. And you can just change your color profile at will, and it won't affect your file at all. That's what's interesting, is that depending on which one you're on, your colors can pop up fluorescent on one and be completely washed out on another, and your file is actually the same. So depending on which profile you're making your image under, you could be wildly swinging the values in one direction, or wildly swinging the saturation in one direction, and you don't even know it. So you need to have some kind of standard baseline, and the standard baseline for publishing is the Adobe RGB 1998 color profile in Photoshop. That is the most stable profile. A ton of different printers have recommended the same profile. So when you're in Photoshop, or you're scanning stuff into Photoshop, if you work traditionally, go to Edit and go to Convert to Profile and pick that profile. That's going to give you a stable base. The next thing is to print out that image on a good printer on semi-matte or semi-gloss paper, because you don't know if it's going to go totally glossy or matte, and try to get a good color proof, and then send that with your job. So you send your digital file to your printer, and then you mail them the proof and say, here's what I think this should look like. 90% of the time, they will love you for that move, and now the printer has something to match.
Okay. Let's say your life really sucks, and you have all this free time. You can do Lee's method.
No, it's clicking a button. It's clicking
I want to add to what Will
button.
said. I have my 10th children's book just came out from HarperCollins, or an imprint. Simon, I don't know. All these 10 different children's books have been with every major publisher. One of them got on the New York Times bestseller list.
For being the worst printed book.
I have no idea what Lee's talking about. I've never done any of that.
If you want to roll the dice, you can. I'm just saying, if you want, you can control a little bit of the process if you care about color. I send proofs in when I'm doing a children's book. If I'm doing a book cover, I don't do that. If I'm doing a children's book, I do. I send in.
Why does it matter for the interior pages, but not for book covers?
A lot of times the turnaround's too fast, and it's just too quick to to mess with that stuff. The children's books are such long projects that I like to be a little more. I just like to put my best foot forward. Unlike Jake, who just Jake pulls out the two-headed horse card, tarot card, and that's how he picks.
Here's the thing, and this is what I love about having the three of us, or another podcast with three other people, or just multiple opinions, is there are some people that are technophobes. You know, they're geeky, techie, and they really want to know. And they ask me these. I get this question a lot, and I'm like, I'm not the guy. I don't. Here's what I did. I bought. This is going to sound like a Wacom commercial. Wacom. I bought a Wacom Cintiq monitor, and I found out every time I send artwork from that I've created on here, it looks exactly like it does on the monitor every time. And I've never been surprised. And so when people ask me this question, I'm like, go get a Cintiq monitor. That's my answer. I mean, like,
Cintiqs
I don't do anything.
Are very, very accurate. With
but really I noticed that on the iPad Pro, the color's way off. I love working on the iPad Pro, but I don't trust it for color.
Mm-hmm. You always bring it into Photoshop when you're done.
And I'm like, whoa, I don't, and most of the time I don't do color on it anyway. But when I have, I'm always surprised. And it always looks really weird.
I'll tell you my poor man / Jake's version of how I do this sometimes is if I'll print one, if I'm not on my studio monitor, I'll basically make a piece of artwork, say it's on my iPad, and I'll send it to my wife. I'll look at it on a couple of different monitors, like my laptop, her laptop. And as long as it might look different, but as long as it looks good on them, I'll let it go.
I see. Okay.
But don't just use one, because yours might be wildly off. And
I do, like, between my Cintiq and my Mac, there's a little bit of difference. So I'm always switching back between those two. And then I'll do one other thing. I have Dropbox on my phone. So as soon as I save a file, I'll open it up on my phone and look at it small. Yeah. And that not only does it like, you can kind of see color variation, but it makes you realize, like, what's the instant, like, read on your image, and if that's getting lost or if it's clear. Just seeing it small like that. That's the other thing I was thinking too. It's like, I would say 90% of my work hasn't been printed. It's just been posted online. And of that 90%, I would say 100% of it has been viewed on every different possible, like, monitor configuration, whether it's handheld in your pocket or on a screen, and you just can't control how it looks on everybody's different monitor. My kids, with their phones, they keep the brightness to the very least so it doesn't destroy their batteries. I know. And they're like, hey, Dad, check this out. And I'm like, hold on, I can't, like, it's glaring on there. I can't see it. How do you turn the brightness up? They're like, you're so old. So
can I tell our listeners 2 pro moves that they can do here?
Yeah.
I used to do that. I don't do this one anymore, but this is a nice little move if you're sending a file digitally and not giving a proof and all that stuff. I used to make a little bit of extra canvas space on the bottom, and I would just do a 10-step scale, black and white scale going from white to black. And I would tell my client when they're viewing it that they should be able to see all 10 steps. And sometimes that when they, if it gets there and their monitor is too contrasty, it'll, like, gum up those last 4. It'll all be black at the end of the scale.
Like they're actual squares?
They're the actual squares. Yeah, just 10% increments. And that way they know, hey, my monitor's screwed up and I'm not seeing the right thing if I can't see each square. Sometimes their monitor, like you said, is too bright.
That is a pro tip.
It's pretty good. And the next one is typically when you get something printed, if you are sending a book cover in or something like that and you're not going to do a printed proof, typically things print a little bit darker than you make them. That's due to dot gain and some other physical stuff you don't have to worry about. So if I'm sending a book cover in, I get it to how I want it to look on my monitor, and then I lighten it in typically the midtones about 10%. Just kick it up a little bit. I use curves. You can use levels too, but I'm more comfortable with the curve because I can control the curve a little bit. But I've never had something come back when it's printed and said, oh my gosh, they made it too light. But how many times it's come back and it's been too dark? A ton.
ton. Yeah, that's a good call. Good call.
Interesting. Well, now you guys know that I've kind of become the advocate of the listener more than you guys. You guys don't care about our
I hate the
listeners as
listener.
much as I do. And one of the things I think some of them are thinking if they're working traditionally is we're only talking about digital, but is this a place, can we answer this? Like, what if I'm sitting here listening and I'm thinking, well, that's great if I'm digital, but now I work traditionally and I got to send in these files that are ready to go. What are my options?
It's the same options though. You got to
Yeah.
scan them in.
What?
You gotta have
Where do
the
you
right
scan
color,
them?
color
How do I
profile.
scan them in? What?
Who's sending in artwork nowadays
can't.
that's listening to this
They won't even.
podcast?
They won't
Yeah,
even.
they
let
won't
you
even
in.
take it anymore.
Here's my recommendations there, and this is from talking to our producer David, who's now shooting my artwork because even though I can do that step, I hate that step.
Mhm.
And he's a photographer; he's good at it. Find a photographer, pay him a little bit of money to basically scan it, but they'll be giving you a high res file that's color correct already.
with like a high megapixel camera, right?
Yeah,
Okay, but the problem is I went to this was back right before I transitioned to digital. So I've got these acrylic paintings on paper. And I did this thing where I wanted to have control of those files because I didn't want to send in the artwork because I was working, and this is dumb. I was transitioning. So I was working half traditional and then finishing up stuff in Photoshop.
okay.
Working backwards. I started them in Photoshop, had them printed onto
Then
my
you're
paper and
painting
finished
over
them.
top.
Painting
Cool.
over top of them. I did that for the frog with the big mouth. And so when I had those files, I had the actual paintings at the end, and I needed to get them shot. And so I had a guy who could do it, but he was a long distance away. And I had this guy that I worked with at UVU who was the photography teacher who said he had just bought the lights to cancel out the noise, So basically what I'm doing is I'm holding my hands up on two different sides of the paper and you shine light from two different directions, and they don't let any of your textures show any shadows.
Right.
And so he said, I've got the right lights. They're color corrected. Everything's set up in my house. I can do this for you. And he was going to charge me about half as much as the other guy. So I took him to him, and they had noise all over him. And noise is like little reflections. They were horrible. They couldn't use them at all. So here's a guy who, quote unquote, knew what he was doing and couldn't do it. So it's not as easy as just finding a.
Well, you got to do a
photographer.
test. You don't want to just send like your important new book
Yeah.
cover job and start from scratch there. You got to do some testing.
Yeah. So for anybody listening to this podcast back in time, like in 2005, here's what you should do.
There are people that work traditionally and they do stuff that they don't feel like they can do digitally, and they want an original to be able to sell.
And I'm totally fine with that. And if you're planning on making this a career and making reproductions of it, and that's going to be a part of your income, invest in a scanner or invest in a camera setup and learn how to do that stuff.
Do
Or
you have to become
just
technical?
find the person that can do it for you.
Yeah,
and
there's the
budget
three
it
options.
out.
It's
The
tough
guy-
though. I want to add that no matter which option you choose, if you're doing traditional, this step will always be a headache.
Yeah.
It always is a headache. All my gallery stuff is big. there's no scanner I can put it on, so it has to be shot in small sections and then tiled together in Photoshop, and it's always sucks.
However,
Scanning
plug,
watercolors never works.
if
that
you're out
works.
here in Utah, Mike Snelson's Photocolor Lab, holy cow, that guy is good. And that's the other guy that I didn't drive to that one time.
And our podcast is sponsored by Mike's.
No. I want you to know, I sent those files into my publisher, and they were like, wow, these are amazing. And they were every time but he knew what he was doing. So what you guys are saying, if this is going to be your thing and you're working traditionally, you just are on a search to either learn how to do it yourself and buy the equipment, or find the person that can really do it. But it's not just anybody with a good camera.
That's very true. It's a good point.